This is the Promising Practices for Health Equity podcast, brought to you by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Hello, and welcome back to Promising Practices for Health Equity, the podcast created by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, affectionately known as IRL. I'm your host, Krystal Lee, and my co-host is the inimitable J. Robin Moon, Associate Director of Research, Evaluation, and Dissemination for IRL. Hey, Robin.
Hi, Krystal. There is only one J. Robin Moon.
There really is. And I'm so glad to know you. As you know, Robin, this season of Promising Practices, we are exploring the experiences, the stories, and the lessons learned by our IRL fellows and alumni. And today we are so excited to have representatives of Cohort 4 with us from Team Louisiana. I am so pleased to welcome Bruce Reilly and Ashley Wennerstrom. Welcome, friends.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
We're so glad to have you here with us. Before we ask you to tell us about yourselves and your work, we invite you to engage with us in one of our signature IRL promising practices, checking in with each other. One of our core beliefs is that nurturing personal relationships is key to building communities that collaborate effectively in the work towards health equity. So at the beginning of our meetings internally, we do a quick check-in to help us continuously build connections in our beloved community. So here's our check-in question for you today. What is the one home-cooked dish that you loved eating growing up? You're from Louisiana. We had to do a food question. I'm going to start. So I grew up, my childhood was in South Korea. And apparently, if you can believe it, I mean, if you know how much and how well I eat these days, I used to not eat. Like, I would refuse. The first word I learned is in Korean, I don't want to eat, before I learned how to say mommy. But so my mom would make this, fried eggs sunny side up, put it in the white rice, and soy sauce and sesame oil and mix it. And sometimes with the seaweed on top. That would be the only thing that I ate. And I still eat it, and I have a very fond memory of that. What about you, Krystal?
Yeah, I had the pleasure and privilege of growing up in Kingston, Jamaica.
Oh.
And yeah, it's everything. And and one of the favorite things that my mom makes is oxtail. Jamaican oxtail is unlike any oxtail that I've ever seen, heard about. And I'm so happy that these days my mom lives close enough to me to be able to make it whenever I want. So I just go to the store and buy my oxtail, take it over to my mom, and she makes it, and it's phenomenal with rice and peas, fried plantain, everything. It's phenomenal. What about you, Bruce?
Well, I mean, I grew up in southern New England, and honestly, my favorite home cooked meal would be myself making Kraft mac and cheese out of the box. And however, my lady love grew up here, and last night she started making these beans. And I didn't even know about beans until, I moved to Louisiana about 15 years ago. And the house just smells like awesome. And that's for dinner tonight. So I get a little bit of proxy love for the home cooking around here through her. So shout out to Erica.
All right, well, I think I'm up. So I grew up in Colorado, but my mom is from Texas, and my favorite thing that we would have every year for Thanksgiving is cornbread dressing. And for those who are from the South, you probably know what I'm talking about. People from the North think of it as stuffing that goes along with your Thanksgiving turkey. But it's just absolutely delicious, and there was always great debate in the family about which member could do it the best, and I think everybody agreed that my mom's was the best. And so I now continue that tradition every year. I always make cornbread dressing on Thanksgiving.
Nice.
Amazing.
The food competitions are good for me.
That was a good check-in question.
Yeah.
I might say so myself.
Good job, Robin. Ashley, would you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we'll popcorn it over to Bruce.
Sure. So I would describe myself as a very proud New Orleanian who strongly values community, whether that's just hanging out, talking to my neighbors, participating in professional communities, or creating community by having my friends over. I'm someone who really values relationships deeply, and I really define myself by my relationships in a lot of ways. Try very hard to be a supportive partner, sister, friend, colleague, teacher, and very proud to be a dog mom. Very passionate about public health, as everybody knows, and equity and justice. And I absolutely love live music, love to travel, and just very inspired by creativity and try to cultivate joy every day.
Lovely.
Yeah, Ashley is really good at cultivating joy. We have a few folks like that around these parts, as you might guess. I used to be a production guy and a DJ, lighting designer in New York City, and I threw it all away to go to law school in New Orleans and to work kind of full time in this world of criminal justice advocacy because I was incarcerated for 12 years, and so many people in community that I knew and connected with was dealing with so many of the other issues that are remnants of slavery in this country. So I came down here, and part of my transition to here was joining up with this guy Norris Henderson, who everybody in our world knows, and we had met prior to me enrolling in law school down here, and he had found an organization called Voice of the Experience, initially in Angola Penitentiary. VOTE is the acronym, and also a sister organization. It's the 501c4, Voters Organized to Educate, that does like political elections kind of work. And so I'm the deputy director of both organizations, and we've grown to be a bit of a minor juggernaut, I guess, in this realm. And we have chapters in New Orleans, Lafayette, and Baton Rouge, and we do a lot of policy work. We do a lot of community organizing. We do elections work. We try to get decent people in office, and we try to like spark public debate with speaking the truth. And so the people that know me know that A, I bring the creativity and the fun because that's kind of been in my bones from the get-go. But B, I'll try to bring a lawyerly, deep kind of analysis to things as well, and merge them together.
I love your introductions, both. Thank you so much. I think we're going to talk about health equity a lot in this conversation, but let's start. Bruce, would you tell us a story of how you came to health equity? You already started telling us health equity work and what health equity looks like to you.
It's funny. I didn't think of what this answer would be until you literally just asked it, and to me, it's obvious. There was a guy named Ron who was locked up with me when I was awaiting trial. I was waiting trial for 3 years, and
Wow.
I started reading the books, the law books, and one of the people who also was doing that was Ron. And along with his criminal charge, and I had my criminal charge, he also had a serious health issue, and it was similar to my brother. My older brother had ulcerative colitis, which eventually turned into colon cancer. Late 20s, early 30s, and so Ron was dealing with ulcerative colitis. So I had a little bit I felt like a connection to what he was dealing with. And I was seeing how hard it was for him to get seen, to get checked out, to get this, to get that. And Ron wasted down to probably about 100 pounds or something. And, they were like saying, you're faking it, all this stuff. And, they wouldn't even give him food because they would say, you can make it to the chow hall. And so through his saga, I started looking into the laws around people who are incarcerated getting access to health care, and and learned one key basic thing that I share with medical students and anyone else who listen is the basic legal standard is either the prison or jail is accused of excusable neglect. Oh, wow, you had a brain aneurysm. Who could know, right? And you died. And it's excusable. And then the other one would be deliberate indifference. And that means we knew you had a brain clot or whatever, and we didn't treat it. And we deliberately were indifferent. And then they're liable. But they're not liable under excusable neglect. And so the way that jails and prisons get around the legal standard, and not necessarily knowingly, right? But they refuse to test. And so that's the biggest issue with the health equity and for people who are incarcerated across the country is not being able to get testing. And then we get to another standard of like, after I've got testing, well, then what? So that's, that's kind of a little background of how I learned about the inequity around the country. And that knowledge came to me back in around like 94, maybe 93, 94. So I've been sort of struggling with this inequity ever since.
That sets us up for a very important conversation today. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Ash, how'd you come to this?
There are a lot of different ways I could tell the story, but I think my interest in health equity started very indirectly. So I first moved to New Orleans back in 2003, and I was an AmeriCorps volunteer working at Habitat for Humanity. And one of the homeowners in our program, and kind of the way that the Habitat for Humanity program works, I'm sure many folks have heard of it, but the idea is that people who are low income partner with volunteers and other homeowners to build their homes with their own sweat equity, and then they purchase their homes at low cost with no interest loans. So I was working on this program, and one of the homeowners in our program was a man named John Thompson, and he had just been released from wrongful incarceration on death row. He'd been incarcerated for 18 years. And I remember at the tender age of 23, being very young and clueless about how the world really worked. And when I saw this man exiting death row after wrongful incarceration, it just really stuck with me. It was really hard to believe that someone could ever be in that situation, that we had a system that was so broken that somebody who was completely innocent could be incarcerated for something they didn't do. And I just kept thinking, gosh, what if he hadn't gotten free? He could have lost his life. I was very inspired by that. And then also with my experience in working for Habitat for Humanity, it was very clear to me that there was something structural, something very wrong going on, because every single person in our program was a person of color. And so just sort of seeing the inequities in this city in a way that had just never struck me before anywhere else I had been, I decided I want to study public health. So I went back to school. I went to the University of Arizona, which has a really strong emphasis on health equity and community programs. Was lucky to have a lot of fabulous mentors there who introduced me to concepts of community partnered participatory research, health equity. I got to start working a lot with community health workers. And so that's sort of how I entered the field.
I'm so grateful that you all are sharing these stories. We've talked about the impact that stories can have and how stories are formed the foundation of the systems that are at work through the mental models that they create. We had a conversation with one of our storytelling experts, gurus, Luis Ortega from Storytellers for Change. And I've learned so much from him. And in hearing your stories, it really solidifies some of the things that I've learned. So thank you all for sharing. Let's shift a little bit to talk about your IRL experiences. Ashley, tell me about how you would describe your experience with IRL.
I loved it. That's the simple version. The longer version is, we came to this experience, I would say, based on our relationship. So Bruce, who's with us today, and then our other partner, Andrea, and I all had known each other for many years and worked together in various capacities. But the IRL Fellowship really gave us a chance to come together in a more structured way, and frankly bought out our time so that we could get together on a weekly basis, talk about ideas, develop research, execute that research. So it was a special experience. I will say it was challenging because the focus of our project was related to healthcare in prisons, and and jails as well, but part of what we wanted to do was actually go into some of the carceral facilities and talk to people who are incarcerated, talk to people who are providing healthcare inside. But our fellowship started in September of 2019. And so by the time we had just gotten up and running and gotten IRB approval and all these wonderful things, COVID hit, of course, in March of 2020. So we had to shift our focus a little bit, but I still think we were able to do some really impactful work. So that was great. And then I also just tremendously enjoyed working with folks from all of the other teams. I found it so inspirational just to see the relationships that other folks had as well, and just learn a lot about the various approaches to health equity, all of the different topics, or sometimes things that I didn't think about on a day-to-day as being part of health equity, but are tremendously important. So it was a lovely experience for me.
To Ashley's point, COVID was tough in so many regards, for everybody's work. So, I think I can only imagine maybe how it is for a cohort that's not straddling COVID issues, the ability to get together and really, if someone's laughing behind a mask versus laughing without a mask, it's a very different experience, and the ability to kind of remember somebody and their name and build that camaraderie. But like Ash said, despite that, I think we were able to really be a good, strong cohort. I think our prison work was, I think, very real for people. Everybody, I think, had a strong connection to our work. And, we were kind of the class clowns as well. So that's always a fun role to play. But yeah, it was a great opportunity to kind of credibilize our work together. And, like Ashley said, we all had our strains around this. Like Andrea Armstrong is a law professor who's really known for her work around prison conditions and the scholarship there and historical aspect. And Ashley, obviously, with her public health background and community health worker work, and then myself with, we had a nice combination of skills. And, in a lot of ways it was easy because this is just like what we nerds like to do.
I was just going to add to that. I think one thing that was interesting and different about our team is that I feel like a lot of teams experienced the very sort of classical challenge in community academic partnered research of having this real distinction between these are the academics over here and this is the community partner over here, and everything's so different in the way that we view the world. And while technically we do have those distinctions based on where we sit, Bruce being the community partner and Andrea and I being the academic or research partners, the truth is, I don't think any of us ever saw each other any differently. Again, largely because we have existing relationships. We know each other really well. But I've never thought of Bruce as exclusively a community person, because he is absolutely brilliant and his mind works like a traditional researcher in many ways. And then I can't speak for Bruce, but I suspect he didn't really think of us as being the traditional academics either, because he knows that Andrea and I aren't those that are sitting behind our desks all day, every day. We're people who have a lot of experience visiting prisons or working on prison conditions. We show up to community meetings. So I think that we're, perceived as being part of the community as well. I don't know, Bruce, does that feel accurate to you?
I think that's a topic that kept coming up, right? In a way that we were often sort of explaining our relationship to others as and people kind of wondering how it is that we interact. And I think, in knowing the goals of the program, to really have that community leadership in the research, and the idea that, maybe researchers would take cues from the community rather than the other way around. And we were able to be that because I think maybe partially because my mind thinks like a researcher, but I think even more, Vote is a very strong organization and has a lot of credibility and leadership. And for Ashley and Andrea to be part of our work, nobody's going to grab the tail of Vote and just start swinging it around and leading the direction. But it's just not the way it is. And maybe I'm a lot to handle. Fortunately, I've got a couple partners who can handle me. But we as an org are pretty strong and straightforward because we've been through so much. And we've made it to a space where it's like, look, I'm going to get on the microphone, or I'm going to, be part of a circle, and damn right, you're going to listen. I fought my ass off to get here. And so I think that strength is something that, we wish and we hope and we try to create more organizations around the country that have that strength, particularly for marginalized communities. If you're like an army of Karens and you're a bunch of like wealthy white or something, maybe that's built into your DNA. But, obviously a lot of our work around public health and such is not from the army of Karens. It's from, people who've been marginalized either politically or socioeconomically.
Yeah. You definitely make for a unique team, and even unfortunately, the topic and the population you worked with also unfortunately is a unique one in our society. And cohort 4, 2019 through 2022, we call internally cohort 4 pandemic baby. So it was really frustrating. I mean, we've seen firsthand how frustrated you were as a cohort and your team. So your project, I mean, the title of your project, by the way, is examining the effects of carceral exposure and health services use, implications for policy and service coordination. I am sure there are many, many, many stories. Can you maybe share one story that stuck with you, that has stuck with you in terms of how, like, what kind of challenges and difficulties through the pandemic that your community being the community, the youth center had to go through?
Well, the one that jumps out for me is obviously COVID happened, for everybody. And for us here in Louisiana, with the massive gulag system of people who are incarcerated, including thousands of people under ICE detention in our system, and we instantly were thinking about people on the inside. We didn't need to hear a story about a cruise ship or whatever, but we know what it's like to be in these close quarters where you don't have 6 feet, nor do you have the option of 6 feet, period. And so, we quickly set up we ended up calling it Mission Possible, this massive inside outside communication system using it's called JPay. It's, this prison communication system, like emails basically. And, we started posting what people were sharing with us about the conditions and the policy changes and the quarantines and the this and that. And, and we had it very structured on our website for journalists and policymakers and public health people, whatever. And we had some very quick, immediate demands of the governor, of the Department of Health. And so we were doing this work and we were trying to, help people understand this story and try to, create some action. And then meanwhile, Ashley and Andrea and myself, we were already in this world of public health in jails and prisons. And so there were a variety of things we did. And I think that was, we were kind of like our version of SEAL Team 6, maybe, where it's like, we're just ready. And, in this case, one thing that we had managed to do was, we used some of our money to hire up a woman to make an animated video of like what transmission is like on the inside and why we need changes. We basically wrote the report for the governor's commission around the issue but it was like a variety of people. And any of us who've ever worked on a report by, let's say, 10 people, there's usually like 2 that write the whole dang thing, and the other 8 say, "Oh, that's great," and maybe they add a few things, but it's important. But Andrea, myself, and one other person I'm thinking of, like, really did a lot of the legwork on that report. And so just like a lot of these little things, and so in a way, there's just us having this sort of standing squad ready to go was the most memorable part for me, I think. Ash?
Oh gosh, I think that's a pretty good description. Leave it at that.
I'm struck by the way that stories are such a big part of the work that you are describing. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the promising practice or practices that you have seen emerge from your project, from your work through your IRL project.
I think the biggest thing is to base your project on relationships, because research funding comes and goes, priorities change all the time. But if you have solid relationships with the people that you're working with, if you're committed to the larger goal of health equity, and particularly with a specific population or in a specific area, you're going to achieve that in the long term. So I think just really focusing on relationships. And I mean, I think it's worth exploring a little bit what that means in the context of our work together. I mentioned earlier that we had all known each other for a really long time, but the way that we came together, I think, is interesting. So I had an experience many years ago where I had a dear friend who was incarcerated and became very sick while he was locked up, and he did not receive appropriate treatment. It took him 6 months to finally be diagnosed with liver cancer. And by the time he got his diagnosis, he was in stage 4, very, very ill. He also was somebody who was wrongfully incarcerated, and his conviction was overturned. And by the time he got out, he was just very, very ill. And he ended up coming home with me, and we did home hospice for him. And he passed away in my home about 3 days later. But as part of that experience, when he was in my home, several of his friends and loved ones came to visit and say their goodbyes, which was a really beautiful experience. And Bruce's colleague, Norris Henderson, who we just mentioned a couple minutes ago, was one of those people who came over. And so I knew who Norris was, but I'd never personally met him before. And I remember shaking his hand over my friend's bed. So that was an important part of establishing a relationship, establishing trust. And I went back to work a couple days later, and the story had been in the paper. And one of my colleagues, who's a physician, came to me and said, "Hey, I saw your story in the paper, and what's this all about?" And she said, I just had this medical student approach me who was really interested in developing some healthcare services for people after incarceration. And do you want to help us with that? And I said, I have no idea about medical services. I'm not a clinician. I'm a public health person. but I do know about research. And I said, why don't we start by interviewing some people who've been incarcerated about their experiences with healthcare in the transitional period. And so we called Norris and said, hey, Norris, do you want to work on this? And he said yes. And so he helped us recruit people to participate in the study. And we interviewed men and women and learned all about the experiences they had. And we decided that we wanted to go a little bit further with that. So a couple of things happened. My colleague, or I should say our colleague, who's the physician, Dr. Anjali Niyogi, ended up designing an entire clinic called the Formerly Incarcerated Transition Clinic, which is still operating today, which was amazing. And then we also decided that we wanted to spend a little bit more time kind of figuring out how we could all work together as people with public health experience, people who are physicians, people with experiences of incarceration. How could we sort of develop a stronger policy and research agenda, as well as develop this sort of clinical practice with the FIT clinic? So Norris and I ended up applying for a grant together. So we got a small grant from PCORI to form what we called then the Prisoner to Patient Project, or P2P as we lovingly called it. And we started doing a series of community forums. And so Norris would invite vote members, we would invite public health folks, and we all kind of got together and talked about where do we want to go with this. And this was over the course of many, many years. But Bruce got involved. And so that's where Bruce and I met and ended up having great conversations and ended up becoming friends. And then I met Andrea, unfortunately, another situation where someone, Glenn Ford, had come out of incarceration after many years, wrongful incarceration, I should clarify. He'd been on death row for 30 years, and he also was diagnosed with cancer just a few months after he got out. And she and I and several other people helped care for him as he passed away. And so I met Andrea in that context. And so having these sort of long-term and also very deeply emotional experiences with folks really cemented our relationship. I'll let Bruce talk about how he knew Andrea, but the main point to understand is that we're all clearly very deeply committed to this work, willing to invest a lot of time in it and invest in each other, get to know one another. So when this opportunity came up, it was kind of a natural fit that we would apply together and be able to do something. And again, research projects come and go, things change. We know that sometimes you start at point A and think you're going to get to point B and you end up at point Z instead, and that's totally fine. And I think that's kind of what happened with us. But because we had the solid foundation of shared commitment, of friendship, of relationship, we knew that we were going to be okay kind of no matter what happened.
Yeah, and I think some of the practices that come out of those relationships is quickly knowing when, for instance, when I get an email about, this or that, or like medical care in prisons or whatever, I kind of have my go-to team. And it's like, okay, what are the other heads that I want to bring to the table, and whose brains we want to pick, and how might we implement a program and design it, et cetera. And it's funny because I think for a while I kept mistaking or accidentally adding Anjali, Dr. Yogi onto our team emails. I was like, oh yeah, I forget you're not on this IRL team. She was like, but when I think about like other people who take an attorney, Nishi Kumar, who I met like when she was first starting out after law school with one of our comrade organizations, the Promise to Justice Initiative, and she ended up working on the medical lawsuit at Angola Penitentiary. Now she's with a group called the Medical Justice Alliance. And so she's sort of part of the sort of go-to team. And, and I get inquiries from different parts of the country at times. Like recently, someone's, was working on following up to this bill in Colorado that got vetoed, which is about these co-pays that they charge people when they're incarcerated, which becomes a deterrent. And so when I'm thinking about like, what strategies they might deploy, and they're calling me for this reason, because I'm sharing lessons learned from our own wins and losses along these similar things, and then just trying to think through what they might be able to try to do and who they might bring together to do it with. And Ashley taught me so much about doing research and doing forums and bringing people together for focus groups and how one might do that. And so it's been the ability to educate people, I think, is the number one practice, and bring people into the circle and keep expanding the circles, more like Olympic rings or something. And now I'm constantly, whether it's Anjali asking, Ashley asking, or Marsha Glass asking, or somebody asking like, oh, we want to do this thing for our med students or our public health students, or to get them aware so that they're not 35 years old going, oh my goodness, there's this whole of health inequity that I had no idea was happening. So we try to get them out of the gate understanding that this is a space that you might do good work in if your career goes this direction, and or at least perhaps volunteer in that direction.
So interesting. Every episode we have to talk about promising practices is nothing about research, nothing about methodology, nothing about how to make it more rigorous and whatever that means. I'm hearing concentric circle of relationships and trust that grows.
Mhm.
That's your promising practice. So my natural question is, what's been the post IRL future for you? What have you been up to since 2022? And are you together? Are you working separately? Tell us.
Well, we did just apply for another grant, kind of in a way to continue the work, related but not like connected. Vote is looking for a large grant to do work that's themed around the public health impacts of incarceration and the work that we do. And for me, it's something I've been trying to move the community, that does this work in the political community for years, around this idea that, incarceration and jails and such need to be seen through a public health lens. And jails can be seen as like a triage space.
Yep.
For trauma and homelessness and addiction and mental health. And we need to look at it in that way. Like, what would you do if let's say you were a mental health provider and you had someone for 7 days only? Let's not pretend you're going to set up this stupid once a month we're going to meet and blah, blah, blah. And people need to get out of their wrong thinking about what you can do and then start like thinking realistically of what's possible. And so for me, a lot of the work that I've been doing, has been around whether it be political candidates or elected officials, and other organizations, getting us to get to a realistic space of how we might help things. And it's not going to be done by just a bunch of lawyers setting up a legal structure or judges deciding like, I sentence you to healthcare, right? I sentence you to addiction recovery. No, it needs to have these other people in the social services and the medical fields to extend their expertise of like what do you think might work. So I mean, on the day to day, I mean, we've got 30 staff, and I've already had 10 people walk by and ask if I'm on the phone or something. So
You're like, no.
yeah. It's just I love the kind of the hamster wheel of it all in some ways. There's a lot of diversity, at least personally, in what I do, and I really enjoy that, and I like working with teams. But I think what we have not necessarily started, but with our IRL crew here and with Fit Clinic and Anjali and community health workers that we have in our community, Danielle Metz, and it's a thing that we're continuing to move forward and try to expand to the point where we have people like mayoral candidates and the sheriff, speaking from the proper lectern on this subject matter. So it's not necessarily the solutions are right here in front of us, but at least we're talking about getting to the solution instead of just we need to whack people over the head harder and then they'll learn. Anyone who's a parent knows that doesn't actually work.
Right.
Yeah, and from my perspective, just thinking the last several years since IRL ended, one simple thing is we published a few papers from our IRL work. You know how publishing is, it always takes quite a while and longer than one might hope for it to, but we did publish a couple of papers, so we were excited about that. Bruce alluded to it, but yeah, we did just send in a letter of intent for another RWJF grant, which we're supposed to hear about whether we're invited for a full proposal this week, so fingers crossed. We'll let
We
you
even
know.
made bets on what time we'll get a response. So.
We are taking bets. I'm guessing Friday at 10 a.m. We'll see if I win. But I will say one thing that has come out of the work for me is some of the stuff that I have learned from Bruce in terms of community organizing. So we haven't really talked about it because it's not the space and we don't have enough time. But the vast majority of my work is actually not related to incarceration. Most of what I do is working on developing the community health worker workforce. And I really see community health workers as people who are agents of health equity, the folks who are doing health outreach, health education, advocacy on behalf of their communities. But I feel like I've just really been able to apply a lot of the lessons that Bruce taught me to some of that work. Some of the things that we did in our fellowship, one item was we testified in front of the legislature. And to me, that was absolutely terrifying. That is not a space that I ever thought I would be. And Bruce and Andrea do this all the time. They're completely comfortable, but I learned a lot about the importance of preparation, and especially because I sit in a place where I'm not allowed to advocate for any particular law or bill, but I can provide education. So I learned about how to do that. And since then, I believe 3 times testified in legislative committees about issues related to community health workers. So learned a lot there. So I really value that I've been able to take some of the lessons from this fellowship and apply it in a different space that's also a health equity space.
Ashley is an amazing testifier, very official, very to the point, gets her stuff across, doesn't use a whole
While
lot
I'm
of
shaking.
Yeah, maybe she's shaking in the toes. It's all on video and recorded for people that want to stalk her down. But no, she's great at it. And I personally, I've been saying for a long time, and I'll continue to say it, we need more public health and medical providers to give those testimonies and wear their credentials proudly on their sleeve and say, look, this is my estimation or my professional opinion on this subject matter. And because so much of these legislators, and now we're seeing it so much maybe on the national level, so many of them are just kind of shooting from the hip, like there are a couple guys sitting on the back of a pickup truck at a gas station, and they're not basing their decisions on any kind of research or facts or expert opinions. They're just basing it on their emotional fit of fury at the moment. And that's how so much of our laws are passed. And it's really no different than 150 years ago, just grabbing somebody off the street and driving them down to the tree and hanging them up while everybody celebrates. And Ashley like nicely used the term wrongfully convicted, referring to like John Thompson, Glenn Ford, and it applies to a lot of people. But the old-fashioned term is framed. Like these are people who were framed for there was evidence of their exoneration that they didn't do it, and it was hidden. I'm staring on my desk, I'm staring at a book, Killing Time, which is about John Thompson. We call him JT, about his case. It's great and it's very straightforward, easy to read. And you're like, wow, this is how the legal system ever worked. Never mind in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And right below it is a book, Solitary by Albert Woodfox, talking about the injustices that he dealt with over years. And as you mentioned earlier, Robin, like storytelling. I mean, a lot of folks around here are great storytellers, and and it needs to be done at times, I think, in a lengthy and well understood way, but sometimes we got to get really crafty at being quick and to the point. And that's where our doctors come in handily.
We try. I'm glad you said that though, Bruce, because it reminded me of something else I wanted to mention that we've been doing. And again, you alluded to it, but I want to be very explicit about what this looks like. We have a session every year about health and incarceration for our second year medical students. And so Bruce comes in, Dr. Niyogi, who we've discussed, as well as the community health workers, Danielle Metz and Haki Sakua, who work at the FIT clinic, come in and they talk about their experiences, what it looks like to care for people who are incarcerated, which is very interesting because for Dr. Niyogi, she works at a hospital that's the contract hospital for the state. So when people are too sick to receive care within a prison, they come out to University Medical Center. So she talks about what it's like to see those patients, the needs that they have, and all of their unique challenges of coordinating care between the external system and the carceral system. And then Danielle and Haki talk about their own personal experiences of healthcare while incarcerated, and then the experiences of helping people in their transitional period and sort of getting them connected with primary care, what it looks like to help people get access to medication. And we consistently get incredible feedback from that session every year. All of the students love hearing from people who are directly impacted. So that's really powerful. And I do think that matters a lot in reshaping the narrative around healthcare and incarceration, and just incarceration in general. And as we're talking about telling stories, I think that that's one of the most important things we can do when we're thinking about issues related to incarceration is humanize people. I feel like so often, and Bruce can of course speak to this better than I can, but I feel like so often the narrative that we have around people who are incarcerated is they're bad, they did something wrong, let's lock them up and send them away. Well, it's a very different scenario when that person comes into your hospital or into your clinic and you see them as a human being. It's a very different scenario for me as someone who has a friend who's incarcerated. Every time I go to Angola and I sit in a visiting room, I don't see bad people. I see human beings who are there with their families. I see guys who are sitting there with their children sitting on their laps and playing games with their kids. I see guys who are hugging their mom for the first time, sometimes in months. And it completely changes the way that we think about our carceral system, what the purpose of it is. Are we there, to punish people, or are we trying to actually rehabilitate people? And most importantly, why are people there in the first place?
I mean, that's because of the mental model underneath that, which, the wrongdoing, let's say, equals wrong, a bad person. So that we're not able to distinguish the two. And like we look at those humans as, fundamentally different from the other good people, right? So your
Yeah, I
work.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that's great about anyone who's familiar with science or medicine, or you can't treat one part of the body on its own, right? You can't just look at some impact. You got to understand how all these things work together. And whether you're a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner or whether you're a neurosurgeon or something, there's so many parts that work together. But and I say that to say, when it comes to people committing crimes, right? No one necessarily asks, well, what happened before that? And what happened before that? What happened before that? What happened before that? And then you start to get an understanding of like, wow, we need to make some structural changes to our society so we don't keep having these similar situations, And one thing that I learned, from a undocumented type of research project that I was part of was I had all these stories of people on the inside, and so many people trusted me, I think for a variety of reasons, but partially because I was like the law guy. And so, but people would come back to prison sometimes. Maybe they're facing a parole violation or a new charge or probation violation.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, yeah, what happened? And they want to tell me the nuts and bolts of the crime, right? Like, oh, I didn't do this or that, blah, blah, blah. Or they got me on this, but not on that. And I'd be like, well, what happened before that? Because I was partially curious, not, I wanted to help you with your situation, but also like I'm trying to get out of prison. I'm also trying to learn about my community and my society at large.
Mm-hmm.
And, then I started to see various patterns of what led people to come back to prison after having been through the rigmarole. And from the time that many of us were teenagers, when we really kind of fell off into the ditch, or in this case, people that might have been in their 30s or 50s even
Mm-hmm.
fell back into the ditch, you see these other structural things around healthcare and housing and employment and
So
trauma.
much. Yeah.
I mean, it's just unfortunate that, we have people that still just want to look at that one end game crime situation and not bother to look back and at the broader circumstances and want to fix that. It's almost like they want those crimes to happen so that they can then do those other things that happen after that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for sharing your stories. I think one point that I take away of many that I take away from our conversation this morning is how important context is to the specific circumstance that we're discussing. The circumstances surrounding a particular issue it's valuable to explore those as well. Thank you both for sharing so deeply this morning. We are going to change gears a little bit as we close our conversation, just to talk about change. So one of the core beliefs of this podcast team is summed up in the words of Octavia Butler when she says, all that you touch, you change, and all that you change changes you. Will you tell us, please, how IRL, our beloved community, has changed you, and how you think that you have changed the program and the community that you're serving?
I mean, I think for me, it was an opportunity to realize that my community-based work can have an impact on people in academia, not just theoretically, but actually. And so that in turn helps me orient sometimes the activities that I do and say like, okay, this can be worthwhile over here. I'm not just spinning wheels or doing clout for clout's sake or something. Like I want to, if there's no impact, I got other things to do. And so IRL was a great opportunity for that. And I definitely can see some of that continuing.
For me, I would say, I have often felt like academic work can be very isolating. And I don't have anybody else at my institution who does the exact same types of things that I do on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes I try to describe my work to my colleagues and they look at me like, they don't quite understand, which is fine because I certainly don't understand the things they do either. But it was really nice to just enter into a space without having to feel like I had to explain what I was doing or why. It was just very clear we were all there for the same reason. So I left feeling very inspired. Like I mentioned earlier, I felt like I learned a lot about other aspects of health equity that I didn't know much about. So that was really exciting. And then as far as how we may have changed our community, I really do hope that we drew attention to the importance of rethinking the issue of mass incarceration and how to address it. And I hope that we brought some humanity to people who are incarcerated, in the eyes of our colleagues. And again, I really hope that people have come to understand the importance of relationships in developing long-term work. I hope that we model that well.
You absolutely have, Ashley and Bruce.
Well, thanks. I mean, there's only one MacArthur genius on our squad.
Oh, MacArthur genius. I've heard of it.
NBD.
Always our final question. Working towards equity and against systems of oppression can take its toll, as you all know. Can you please share with our listeners in a brief words how you engage in self-care as you do this difficult work?
And mine's easy. I have a big costume closet, and if I come to a city near you, I'm gonna raid your vintage or thrift stores looking to add to it. If you know any like crazy like 1970s ladies who had like some cool weird stuff, like I need it. And I also dance professionally, mind you, for the NBA New Orleans Pelicans senior dance team has me on their squad. We dance on center court, 1 game per month. And I'm looking forward to my second season when the Pelicans win the NBA title and I'm in the finals dancing on the. So there you go.
Amazing.
That just reminded me of when we interviewed for the IRL fellowship, and the first question was that we had to introduce one another. And I remember saying that Bruce was a really good dancer, and they looked at me kind of funny, like they were not expecting to hear me say that. Okay, so for self-care, I recently heard a funny thing that was if you are over the age of 40, you fall into one of 4 camps. And it's either you're into plants, making sourdough bread, pickleball, or weightlifting and protein. And so I would say I'm firmly in plants.
Yes.
With a side of sourdough. I don't actually make sourdough, but I do like to bake. And I am moving towards weightlifting and protein. I've been working out a bunch lately, trying to get strong. And then I also absolutely love walking my dog, a little 45-pound adorable mutt named Goose. And she's a sweet baby angel. So I spend a lot of time with her.
Yeah.
I love it. Wonderful. Team Louisiana and Andrea, honorary presence. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We deeply appreciate your insights.
Well, thank you
Thanks
guys.
for having us.
Krystal. Good seeing you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bruce and Ashley. Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. Listeners, we would love to hear from you. What promising practices are you using or developing in your work to achieve health equity? Find us on the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders LinkedIn page, where you can share your thoughts, your stories, and leave questions for the team. And don't forget to subscribe to Promising Practices for Health Equity so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us on this journey, where every step we take brings us closer to a healthier, more just world. Until next time, take care.
Promising Practices for Health Equity is produced by the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program, a national leadership program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. A special thanks to our guests, our production team at Studio Americana, and to you, our listeners, for being a part of this important conversation.